Here we are, Mom and Dad. We showed you.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Dungeons and Degrees. My name's Adrian,
And I'm Alex.
and today we have a first. We have a new guest and we have a returning guest. New guest, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody. My name's Anthony Joyce at Thrawn589 on Twitter, and I am a D&D designer and an active duty Army strategist in my real job. So thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat D&D with you all today.
I'm glad to have you on. And for our returning guest, Dave, introduce yourself, or reintroduce yourself, actually.
Okay, I'm Dave. Last time I was on, we discussed coming back for episode 100. So, a little bit early. I'm happy to be here. The last time we talked, I didn't really have much to promote, but I've started dabbling in DMsGuild and stuff. So maybe there's people that want to reach out to me. So you can find me on Twitter at MrMcFlavo.
Awesome.
What we
Dave's...
do, that's our goal, is to just spread our love of doing things that are out of character, and then just having everyone try new things.
Of course.
You're welcome. That was us. I'll take credit.
You can take credit, and we can all take credit. But yeah, I the topic that I kind of wanted to talk today was kind of about your Anthony's work, and as someone who hasn't kind of participated in making modules for the DMs Guild, I brought Dave on to because he has a little bit more insight, so I didn't want to come in totally blind about that kind of aspect of D&D, making these third-party kind of modules and information pamphlets and all this cool stuff. But yeah, I guess do you want to kind of talk about one of your favorites? You don't have to necessarily kind of talk about the ones I kind of suggested earlier, if you so wish to.
Yeah, so I think what I will do is I can share some of the creative process for me, because I think this affects both creators, dungeon masters, or players that are making characters and things like that. And one thing that I found really helps me when I get into the creative mindset, let's contextualize this. So I'm gonna make a product. I mainly make adventures, okay? And so I think about bringing an experience to the game table. And again, this applies both as a dungeon master if you're doing your own homebrew, or if you're actually like Dave here, getting started on the DMs Guild. And so what I found helps me is to identify the tone initially that I want to go for. So am I going to have a comedy type one shot or a campaign? Is it going to be more serious in tone? Is it going to be emotional in tone? And once I identify this type of flavor that I want, and part of that is knowing the players that I'm going to have, okay? If they're friends, I'll talk to them ahead of time about what are they looking for in the experience, because the best type of experience you can get is one that's collaborative. Now, from a product perspective, when I design one, I can thematically package it. It goes out into the world, and I have no control over who's playing it. But what I'll say is, when I get the overall tone and theme, I latch on to music personally as a creator. And I will find and scour, Spotify is what I use, but I will find the tones and the theming that I'm trying to feel in the adventure. So let's use Weekend at Strahd's, because that was brought up before. Mm-hmm. So Weekend at Strahd's is an 80s retro throwback to, Weekend at Bernie's, the old movie, but done in Curse of Strahd style. So you're dealing with Strahd. And so for me, when I made that adventure, I collaborated with some folks on there, Oliver Darkshire one and Rob Davis, and I listened to 80s music for about a month, just top 80s hits, and I just felt it. And so in my mind, as I create, I don't write down on paper notes or really do outlines, and I know some people swear by that, and that's great. My creative process is a little bit different. I immerse myself in thematic music, and then I'll just listen to that music on my spare time, and I'll marinate on the creative ideas that I want to implement, and then eventually I'll get those on paper, but they come through the music. So for that adventure, I latched onto, I think there's 10 different sections in the adventure, each one of them associated with a song. So I would listen to music, Flashdance is one that is in the song, right? And one song that's in the game. And I thought, okay, Flashdance, it's, there's this 80s movie, you had the workout routines going on. What would fit with Curse of Strahd theme? And then I thought witches and cauldrons and hags and a hag coven. And so I merged the two that way. So as a creator in kind of manifesting the creative process, that is one way I do that. And again, that was, if we start from the beginning, it's I want to have a comedic adventure. I want to tie it to a theme. What's the theme? It's going to be 80s retro. Okay. Once I have that theme, I listen to the music associated with that theme, and I'll identify specific music to go with the adventure that I'm building. So I hope that gives some insight. So I'll toss it back to you.
That just reminds me of the Twilight soundtrack. In the formative years of my life, when I thought Twilight was a good idea, I remember being obsessed with the soundtrack because the soundtrack is what helped inspired write the book. And so that just brought back all those memories. And I'm sorry that you do the same thing that Miss Stephanie Meyer does, but you're not alone. Sorry, that was not D&D related, but
no. Again, yeah. I think you look at big creative things in our culture, right? And you have like Star Wars. I don't know if you could have Star Wars and separate it from the music, okay? And like John Williams, composed that soundtrack. And I think Jaws, right? You have the thematic Indiana Jones, Star Trek. So there's so many powerful creative cultural outlets in our own life, and you could see how music has a heavy factor in that. Like you really can't have one without the other. So for me that works. And for those out there listening, if you're not an organized taking notes and doing outlines all over the place, try something else, and maybe something like this might help you.
That's
this is how we bring back the mixtape.
Mixtape, hell yeah.
Yeah, it's how we do it. We bring it back
through the creative field of creation to make its own organization through this kind of like mindset of music. That's amazing. I mean, I don't do notes very well. Most of my players, Dave, end up being the ones that take like the whole like notes of what had happened to them, and I have like bullets points like scattered across like 5 different folders of just like whatever I picked up at the time. Like this is what's going to happen next, maybe if they go that way. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I do the creative process, but I don't know if it's that way or any way in particular. But I think finding your way is its journey in itself. And a lot of people get discouraged when you're like pointing to them and saying like, hey, this is how you take notes. This is how you organize your things. And like, but it might not work for them in that way. So I think bringing Anthony on and bringing his experience forward, that it could help somebody out to find out what their creative way of focusing is.
And creativity is such a hard thing to just nail down. I remember taking a couple of classes in college about just promoting creativity, and it was just wild of like, you just do the thing. Just do the thing. And I think if you're talking about somebody who's already nervous about being perfect and then worried about it not being good the first time, and then maybe you're a little bit distracted, so then you don't feel like you can put your full attention on the project, so then you shouldn't do the project at all. I think that creativity is just, literally throw everything against the wall, see what sticks. And if it sticks for you and it works, then great, awesome. Continue to do it. If it doesn't stick, then try something else, because why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for anyone who's listening who wants to get into the creative side of things or Dungeon Master or things like that, there is not a single adventure that I have made that I don't end up hating the process of completing it. Okay, so like it takes mental willpower to kind of cross the finish line. So I don't know, and this goes for many creators that I know, it's not like an easy thing. So if you're out there and you're like, hey, I'm going to make an adventure, and you start doing it and you start to be frustrated with yourself or just, writer's block, and you're just like, why is it happening to me? Just understand that that's completely normal. And everybody experiences that. And I think there's some solace in knowing that, because it's not about you. Like it's not strange that it's happening to you. It's part of the process and the journey. And just know that, you will eventually complete it, and it may not be the best experience in terms of like, you might get frustrated here and there, but you can complete it and it can end up being a great product. But those frustrations are natural, they're normal, and they're to be expected. So if you're going into that, just have that mindset of, hey, I may get a little bit burned out, I might get a little bothered, but don't take it as there's something wrong with you. Just understand that that's part of the process, so it can help motivate you to continue finishing.
How many different ways did you, how many, like, if you remember any outlets that you used in order to like spark your creativity? Is there anything that stuck out that you were like, this is definitely going to work, and then it just like bombed?
Ooh, interesting. So where I find this goes to play testing. That's really where it comes out. Okay, so like I will have a lot of my adventures. I'm fortunate enough where I'll get maybe 10 play testers that run it, but a lot of my stuff has to be reworked. And what I'll say is, if you can play test, it's very important, especially for a product, because in your mind, what you visualize is completely different, you know, especially if it's just words on a paper compared to how somebody else will visualize what you've written. The way context and nuance works in the written word can be taken so many different ways. So what I've done is I'll do Google Forms. So if you want an easy way to play test, what I do is I do a Google Doc, Google Forms, and I say my adventures are normally split into like 3 parts. So I'll have part 1, what did you like most about this, and what did you like least about it? And I'll do that for each part, and I'll give it to the play testers. They'll run the adventure, and then they'll give me a lot of feedback by filling out this form. And what I do is I can read the comments, and I can find trends. So some comments I can, you know, disregard because somebody hated this one part, but the other 9, they don't mention that. So I know that's not really a problem. But when I start to see 3, 4, 5 people mentioning the same part, then I understand it's a problem. And the biggest issue I had, believe it or not, there was I have the Air of Orcus First 3. It's an adventure that you can get on DMsGuild, and it's kind of like a cyberpunk, you know, Blade Runner type feel. And there was one battle scene that I had that takes place in the mind of like an artificial intelligence. And I thought it'd be a really cool idea to say, hey, the players get to build the battle map, right? Like they get to virtually play stuff because they're in this artificial environment. Well, as cool as that may sound, it went horribly in playtesting because when you turn to the player as a DM, you're like, all right, tell me what the battlefield looks like. You're going to get a lot of like stunned faces. Like, what are you talking about? I'm here to play, not to build a map. So I had to completely scratch that idea and then implement something different. So, you know, lesson learned, you may have some creative ideas that push the envelope, but they just may not be well received, and that's okay. But through playtesting, if you're able to do that, you can, it does add time to your production cycle, but if you're open to the constructive feedback, you can make your adventures much better.
Amazing. I think, I mean, I kind of had that experience of like getting feedback for the first time because I've tried my hand at like a one shot with these friends of mine, and I'm like, what worked and what didn't work? Because like my mind doesn't work the same as another individual. Because like, of course, this puzzle makes sense to me, but like, how do I kind of facilitate that in words and through visualization, through me telling them what they look like, and what's going to kind of make it click for them? So when I got some feedback, like, you know, the torches, it wasn't obvious that they could be, you know, doused with water, and then, you know, this water elemental comes out and all that stuff. So like, it wasn't obvious to them, but to me, who was like creating it, was like, of course it makes sense. There's a bunch of water around. Why wouldn't they? But they just like, oh, I thought it was just like thematic and just there, you know? Nobody said like, it needs to be more intuitive. So like, when I got that feedback, I'm like, okay. And I have to like remap a bunch of stuff, but I think it's an interesting process because you're actually kind of like, my mind can only do so much by itself to express itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting one there. So I've read so much about that exact thing, like puzzles in D&D or traps and secret rooms, okay? And all the like world building stuff that like people go and they make their own homebrew settings, and like, aha, the mayor is actually a vampire, and if only they knew the secret plot I have. Like, those secrets and those plots and those traps and those all that stuff that has to be discovered, well, deep down inside, as a creator, we want everyone to discover it. Now, it's odd because we think of like video games where some people may not discover the secret, but what we really want is we want to get the satisfaction of the player, like their eyes lighting up at the cool thing we made for them to discover. So we have to understand, and this happens to me all the time, and I have to check myself, but you want to make traps or puzzles or secret plot hooks extremely discoverable. Like there shouldn't even be a doubt in your mind that a 10-year-old child can solve that. And I think sometimes when we initially design things around that concept of a secret, we make it where like it's a 50-50 chance they'll solve it. But like like when they didn't put out the torches, you're kind of deflated as a DM. Like you think naturally you'd be like, aha, only the smart ones can solve that trap. But when they don't, you don't get any satisfaction either. So as creators and as DMs, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. All these secrets, if they stay secret, they don't exist for the player. Like they just straight up don't. You just might as well not have done any of that work to create that thing because no one knows about it. So it's a weird thing to think about, but there really should be no secrets. There should be, I'm doing hand quotes here, secrets. But you know, they are 100% discoverable, and you want your players to enjoy it. So, yeah.
I've even had that thought about inputting magic items into my campaign. Sure, they're under like a chest that has a secret compartment, but I put that magic item specifically there for you to find. And if you don't find it, if I make you roll for it, if I make the DC too high, I'm actually going to be disappointed when you don't have that magic item.
100%. Exactly.
I think it's interesting that we're talking to a military strategist that doesn't outline their projects. My brain doesn't put those two together.
Well, that's a good point, right? You would think so. Now, there's many different types of thinkers. You have, I would say, me as a strategist, I'm more of the conceptual, philosophical, theoretical type of strategist. Okay, and a lot of those type of thinking is more aligned with social sciences and things like that versus like math and STEM. So I would associate your traditional military officer that you would see on TV or a movie. Those are more of the, you know, quantitative numbers, got to have a plan all mapped out and everything, versus a strategist is more of the squishy thinker. You know, how do we do this conceptually, theoretically? How does the future look like? So yes, I think because I align in that little bucket, you can see my creative process kind of mimic that, where it's a little bit more squishy and fluid, and versus very hard and pragmatic and kind of structured in that way.
That makes sense. It's like I don't really know what a military strategist does, but when I think of it, I think of probably kind of what you're alluding to, like the guy on TV who's got everything just so. So yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that.
I'll use a good metaphor here. I don't know if you all are big Star Wars buffs, but I am. And there is a character named Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's in the Rebels show. He's mentioned in The Mandalorian. But anyway, he's a strategist, and he uses art to beat his enemies. So he'll like look at paintings to kind of conceptualize how these people fight, and then he'll beat them. So that's kind of like a metaphor I'll use, like someone, you know, the artsy kind of squishy type of thinking versus the, you know, I have a battle plan and it has to go exactly this way, and if it doesn't go this way, then I'm screwed type deal.
Yeah, I love it.
No, I mean, that's more, I like the idea of like this, like the what ifs, like not everything's going to be written down, and like, you know, what your plan is to do is not going to just go into these perfect like placements, like, oh, this square fits into this square hole. You know, that's not how the world works. The world's a little bit more fluid, and just like, you know, this square can also fit in this circle hole if it's small enough. You know, you just have to be able to kind of like adapt and figure out what is going on at any time. I mean, I feel like that's how I play as a DM. I don't plan too much. I get like briefest of ideas, and I'm like, this is kind of what I want my party to do, and we'll see how I can kind of like either kind of convince them through storytelling elements, or just like kind of egg them on. But you know, if they don't go for it, for sure, let's go down this path and let's see what I can give them to still continue on my own path as the DM, trying to play with the party.
Absolutely. And you know, for some things, like I'll talk more of the Heir of Orcus adventures I have. Those are some of the first I did, and they're designed in an open manner, kind of like what you're talking about, where the players they're doing things on their own. And this goes back to the discussions that you might hear in DM circles about like the railroad adventure versus a sandbox or whatnot. And I think what is interesting from a creative perspective, and this goes for dungeon masters and everybody as well, when you have an adventure, the ending should be like the point that you want your players to culminate at. So in my adventure, I have this daughter of Orcus, and she's gonna get freed or she's gonna get killed. Like that's the end of the adventure. I know that. How the players get there in this specific example, they can side with really holy knights of justice like paladins, or they can side with devils who hate demons and kill the paladins and then go kill the demon. Now, I've had a lot of DMs, they're like, hey, well, which side do the players go to? And the reality is it doesn't matter, because if you go with the paladins or you go with the devils, those are different adjacent paths, if you will. The endpoint is always leading you the same, but it gives the players that sense of agency. Like, I made a choice and I chose to be evil, or I chose to be good, or I chose neither and I rejected both sides. But the end is always the same. So I think as creators, especially in game design, and at DMs, you're doing game design, you're not publishing it. It is to help create the illusion of choice almost. Like, the story end might be the same, but if you can really give that illusion of choice where they're making meaningful choices throughout the game, but it's going to culminate at a certain event, I think those are really good adventures, because the player is satisfied. They got to make all the choices they want with no restrictions, but the DM and the creator is satisfied because it culminated at the peak of the story arc that they were trying to help convey. So,
yeah. I mean, that's what I'm excited about. The very end of my campaign, because like, oh, this battle's gonna be epic, but I gotta get these level 1s to that level 9, but it's gonna be great.
And it's just funny because when I was preparing to run I'm gonna say it, Alex. We've already said it, but Curse of Strahd game. I think I made an 11-page outline in Word. And so much of it immediately got thrown to the wind and continued to get thrown to the wind as the campaign went. But I like to think that we had kind of checkpoints, and that's kind of what I was thinking about when Anthony was saying kind of where you want to bring them. And I think the checkpoints, if I had to choose the ones that I really wanted to make sure we kind of had those moments or arrived at those places or what have you, that we got there. And just take some of that like dungeon master flexibility and creativity, despite my 11-page outline.
I'm sure many people would love that outline. That's a good DM right there. It shows you love what you're doing. So kudos.
Thank you. I have shared that outline to a dungeon master or two. I assumed they looked at it and went, oh boy, this is a little bit much.
Is there like a question you get a lot as a creator for DMsGuild?
I'm trying to think of a specific question. People always ask, how do you start? How do you, make a successful product? And I think for me, the most successful products I have are collaborative in nature. There are, even if I'm the lead designer and the only credited lead designer on a project, I still always have an editor. And that editor is a partner in the creative process. Even Gordon McAlpin, who does my layout and graphic design and sometimes illustrates my stuff, he will actively give me constructive feedback on the design itself. And I think that is something that takes, you have to kind of almost humble yourself a little bit in that regard to be open to someone saying like, hey, this just is really not happening, or this part is just really not good. Can you do it this way? And if you're open to different people's ideas, it really enriches the product and it makes it shine, because I think 2 minds are better than 1, 3 minds are better than 2. And now, to a limit, you have to be able to manage that. There is some project management skills that go on, and you have to know when to say no. Thank you for the advice, but I am going to stick to this. But again, once you build relationships with other creators out there, you can find out the ones that you work well with, the ones whose advice you trust, and then you can continue making projects with them. So Justice Armin is a great designer that we work on a lot of projects together, and he is someone who I wholeheartedly trust, and he has steered me away from some design decisions that I had wanted to pursue, and he gave me some other alternatives, and that has really helped me to create some really cool stuff. And the same for him. I'll do the same for him. So I think if I were to say, when people ask me what's the best way to get started, I would say one, there are resources like the Storytellers Collective, which run workshops on writing an adventure for the first time or an encounter. So pursue that. They have scholarships for that, and I think it's like $20 or $30 if you pay it on your own full time. The second step is when you finally begin creating things, bring in a collaborator, build trust with them, and be open and learn from each other. Different life experiences will make your product much better. Like, again, I'm a military guy. When I have females or non-binary or any other type of gender on my team, they're going to bring a different life experience and a lens that I simply lack. And so when they bring that in to the creative process, and then I have mine on top of that, the product is just 10 times better. And I think we see that with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which has over 50 million players now. It's the best position it's ever been in its history, is because they have done the same thing. They're injecting all these different diverse elements into the creative process, and the products are appealing to just a bigger base of people. So that's kind of one thing I'll think is very important.
And that makes a lot of sense because even, running a podcast, I would have not done it by myself. I would have hopped out. I think at some points Adrian would have hopped out if it was just by himself. But I think, not only having that collaborative property is really beneficial for the end goal, but just that accountability buddy also really helps of, hey, I see that you're doing the thing, you're doing a good job, here's how we can make it better. Or, just sort of that camaraderie of friendship while struggling together, even if it's a project you like, it still has to take work. It still does time, even though, you may want to just curl up in bed and take a nap. You're in it together. So I think, it makes a big
100%,
difference.
yeah. That's a great point. Accountability, buddy. I like that. That spot on right there.
Yeah, and I think that, that's the big thing. That's D&D. This story, if it was just me just playing, like creating something by myself, it'd be, okay. But if I'm like working with others, I'm, making this story, and then the players play in this like kind of, I guess, story, and their elements, their experiences, their kind of viewpoints make it diverse and make it more fun. If it was just me and Dave, I think it'd be interesting, but it wouldn't be as good if we had all of the other characters we have.
It'd be awesome.
It'd be so good the whole time.
Yeah, totally.
I think Pink makes it fun. He doesn't talk much, but he puts in like a word or two, and it's just gold all the time.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, little nuggets of wisdom.
But you did.
Everybody has that player, yeah, the silent type, right? That
Yeah.
comes out every once in a while.
That's exactly him. But yeah, we're actually, you said Justice's name, and we're actually going to interview him next week for people to look out for
Tell
it.
him, tell him I trashed him on his show. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
He's an up and coming, he's going to be big in the business. Obviously he works for Beatles and Grimm's, but I talk with him on the phone every day. We're really good friends in real life and collaborators. So I will look forward to listening to that podcast that you have him on.
We'll see how much we can get out of him compared to like what you talk to him about on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I want to have friends that I talk to every day. Adrian, let's start calling each other every day.
Sure. I'm here. I'm always open.
That means that you have to do the work, Dave, that Adrian's not going to meet you 50% of the way.
Well, that's a problem because I'm also that way.
It's okay. Most of my friends are that way, so we talk to each other like once a month, and it's a good friendship. That's all I gotta say.
There you go.
Okay, let's kind of get to, I guess, that one page, the Dreams of Pablo.
Yeah, Dreams of Prince. Yeah, Dreams of Prince Popple. Sure.
Yeah.
What would you like to know, or do you want me to just talk about it?
What I wanted to know is like, what made you like, okay, like versus like this whole kind of compendium of information. Here's a soundtrack that goes with it, and then you have the Dreams of Prince Poppo, and it's like, well, here's this one-page adventure, and it's like, it's simple, but it's just to me it's beautiful, just as it is, and I'm like, how does one decide like this page, this is enough for me to publish it versus like, or not versus, but like in a creative sense, like, all right, this is just enough to get the dungeon master and players to kind of by and satisfied.
Got it. Okay, so that adventure, the inception of it was for MT Black. He had a one-page adventure contest that he ran called The Lonely Scroll. This is back, I think, in 2019. So he announced the adventure contest, and the restriction was it had to be one page. So I, got to think, okay, what am I going to write? Now, I will tell you up front, writing a one-page adventure and it's very, very hard because less words is actually harder to convey the totality of what you're trying to convey when you're limited like that. So it's a very interesting intellectual challenge. So if you're out there and you want to challenge yourself, try to do an adventure on one page, and you're going to have it's going to be an interesting time. So that one, again, I go a lot to tone and theme. Now, that one actually came just kind of inspired myself. And, so Prince Papo, he's my son, Alexander. He's now 5 years old. I call him Papo. That's his nickname. And when he was about a year and a half, my wife, she was pregnant and she had a miscarriage. And so the story, as a father, we never really talked about it much. She had the miscarriage, and then life went on. We have two other sons after that. But when this one patient came up, I don't know what came over me, but something just tugged at my heartstrings, and this concept of a little boy, Prince Papo, looking for adventures to help him find his little brother came to me. And it was a very personal story. So, I get a little bit emotional about it, but it was a story about, someone who lost a child who was lost and finding that. And so the adventure, I think, packs an emotional punch because, again, I think back to this, how do you convey feelings or themes? And the theme is sad, but it's beautiful, and it should be, because in the story, the little boy who is passed, or the child, it's not gendered, it goes on and it kind of has this good life in the afterlife. But so it's a beautiful story, but it's one that is coming from personal experience. It was a way for me to kind of, I think, grieve and kind of get that out of my system. I my wife and I, we cried about it, and it was a good moment for us to do that. So, that adventure won the competition, the Lonely Scroll competition, and you can find it on DMsGuild now, and all the proceeds go to a child's charity. So if you pick it up, it's pay what you want, I think, and it goes to a child's charity. So yeah, so that's that adventure. And again, it's not meant to be sad in the sad sense. It's meant to be beautifully sad, because I think that's a real thing people go through. And as long as you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, I think that's what comes through. So that's that story in a nutshell.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And it's crazy that you're saying something like that. So the reason why we haven't, there may have been a lapse in our recording. I just lost my dad. I mean, I know where he is, but he's not on this mortal plane anymore.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh,
by the way.
Thank you. It's okay. I laughed through the pain, but I just had this inkling to continue playing a one shot that Adrian was running with us, and some of our other friends, and Justin, who's been on the podcast. And through all of this, I'd actually forgotten that I was playing my dad's D&D character, and just was living and just not being around people who were sad, which was really nice. But we get to the end of our adventure, and Adrian, I don't know what made him do it. I'm sure he can talk about it, and if he wants to, I would absolutely love to hear that creative process. But Adrian then describes the next step of my dad's D&D character, and that elevates it past D&D for me. That was Adrian describing what happened and what's going on with my dad currently, and it just it's on Tacos and Tabletop on Twitch. If you want to watch me cry, you can do it. But it was just such a moment for me that I mean, I will continue playing Dungeons and Dragons forever for that very moment, because it was very impactful, and it had nothing to do with, logically anything in the real world, but because of that emotional connection that I just had, and that my DM was playing in the campaign and having that real real life and fictional life intersection, it makes a big deal. So if you're running D&D and you can play on people's heartstrings, you can do it. Make them cry.
And I think it could be cathartic. I mean, I don't know, for you, was that a cathartic experience? Was it,
Yeah.
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 And that's the beauty of it is, this game that we think is a game, it can have meaningful, positive impacts in our lives, which is pretty interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, and thank you both for sharing y'all's experience. It means a lot that for y'all to share it with us. I guess I'll talk a little bit about what had happened. Everybody was kind of getting their kind of wish fulfillment, and I hadn't planned where everybody was going. I had a little social scene prior to this, so I kind of have an understanding of what the player wanted the characters to be like and what they wanted for the future. So when I finally asked this question, like, what is the one thing you most desired? The thing I did with the PCs next was all improv. So the process was get prepped, have an idea, ask the question once more, and figure it out. So when you said, like, I want adventure, I want storytelling, I kind of like, okay, how do you get the most stories? Other than, living your life, like, and doing more adventures, I'm like, this is a one shot. We have to do this fast. So I poofed Larry Scalafani into the astral plane. I kind of sent them as they're watching life in a kind of like a fast forward pace, adventurers rising and falling and kingdoms coming and going. And all of a sudden, kind of described a little bit more, popped them into a tavern and put them to say, like, hey, I've got a story to tell. Just as the character I felt from their description would have done. So, there was no back prep. And I didn't mean for there to be any, like, real parallel of what was going on in real life. But I knew what was going on because Alex had told me. But that was the thought that happened. That's what, like, inspired me to say what I had to say. And then, this is all live and I'm watching my players and then Alex crying. I'm like, you can't, I'm an empathetic cry. You gotta keep talking. So I have to look away from the screen and just, like, keep playing. I'm like, okay, the next person, while I'm, like, holding myself together as she's crying.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful moment that you all had.
Hell,
It really
yeah.
does. Yeah, it really does. The power of Dungeons and Dragons.
Man, who knew?
Who knew?
And I just, not that I'm hating on Adrian, but he's like, it was just a moment that I just felt like it called to me. But, like, for me, it absolutely, and I have not, like, my family is in town and I have not stopped talking about it. And, like, I've shared it with all of my aunts and, like, my Michael's heard it a couple of times, and just, it was one of those things that just was so perfectly timed. Just the way that he explained it and the way that I was interpreting it, like, it was perfect. So it was a very magical moment in Dungeons and Dragons, and I do appreciate it a lot. You will go down in history for the rest of my life. The power you have as a dungeon master far exceeds all expectations.
Alex, do you feel like when you were telling that story, your, like, non-D&D family, did they, like, get it?
They did. And I had some of I was just at the zoo with my aunt, and I was just telling her about it, and she was like, why are you playing? Like, they don't understand because they're of that age where Dungeons and Dragons came about in their teenage formative years, and it was, like, the nerdy thing to do. So it was very opposite of what my family grew up with. And so when I talked to her about why it was important and, like, what happened and, like, what the magic of Dungeons and Dragons is sometimes, she was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then, we had that further conversation like we had with Lee, talking about how, cathartic it is being able to be somebody else and maybe practice using other social skills, feeling more assertive you're not assertive, or maybe just sitting there and listening if you're not one of those listener type people, it just is an opportunity for you to literally be someone else and think something else. But it's a low cost. It's not something that, I'm not going to be forever Larry Scalafani. I'm going to be Larry Scalafani for the moment that it works, and then I'm then left with the memories of that character. So once I think you get to explain, like, working through those emotional things, my family understood. They understood, like, why you would be so obsessed with it. Because on the surface, it's like, oh, I'm shooting spells, I'm throwing fireballs, I'm shooting magic missiles, we're fighting vampires and werewolves and, bugbears, and that's silly. And you're just sitting around, in the basement, not showering, all of those things that come up in your brain. And I think what is lost in a lot of even pop culture references in Stranger Things, or wherever else Dungeons and Dragons pops up, I think we forget that there is an emotional side of playing.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Especially if you make yourself vulnerable to the immersion, and you open up. You can get a lot out that way. And like you said, it was a good point. Like, just even being assertive in the adventure, I mean, it can be used. I know the military has dabbled in using D&D and tabletop games for, like, PTSD, treatment, because you can either revisit or kind of relive or overcome obstacles that you have had, and get that cathartic feeling of accomplishing something, of facing a fear, or things like that, and being someone else, or being something else, that you want to kind of emulate. So it's a very powerful thing. I can't think of, like, a video game that would bring that out. There's something immersive about the role-playing aspect that D&D has.
The only video game moment that I can think of is the DLC from Borderlands 2, and it's Tiny Tina's Dragon Keep, which is still a Dungeons and Dragons based DLC. Like, it's still there. So yeah, I think it's a big moment. But that's interesting that it's being used in military. Is that wide and common, or is that, like, fairly small?
So there is research, psychological counseling type research that's peer reviewed and things like that, that shows the effects of role playing tabletop games and things like that on patients who are suffering PTSD. And there's also anxiety and a lot of different other things out there that this can help benefit. So it's being introduced into the medical community, and in the Army, they've used it for that. We actually have a esports team that the Army created, where they're now playing D&D. They're trying to start playing D&D. They are playing Magic the Gathering competitively and stuff like that. So gaming as a whole, they're seeing, like, this net positive effect that it can have on people, and so they're incorporating that into the Army.
It's brilliant. Very cool.
Yeah.
And here we are, years ago, our parents would say, when you get older, you're not going to play video games.
Yeah, wasting all your time.
Yeah. Here we are, Mom and Dad. We showed you.
I'm teaching high schoolers, and they're all telling me they want to, be a gamer or a YouTuber and all this stuff, and it's starting to get hard to tell them, they might want to look elsewhere. It's, there's a lot of job opportunities popping up in there.
Yeah.
In those fields.
I have a split, like, 50-50 job future wannabes with my second graders, that 50% of them want to be law enforcement or some sort of emergency services, and the other half want to be TikTok famous.
Yeah, I believe it.
Oh boy.
That's awesome.
Anthony, to cycle it back just a little bit, when you win that contest for the Dreams of Prince Popo, did you feel like a pressure on your future projects to try to kind of, like, tap in to some sort of, like, deep emotion or powerful, like, motivator for your other ventures?
I didn't feel like pressure, like, oh, I need to succeed, or there's a lot of, expectations. I didn't feel that. I think again, I have the luxury of I have my military career, so I don't need to do this to get a job at Wizards of the Coast, for example. So the stakes are maybe a lot less for me because I'm doing it for fun, and so then I don't really have to care about the how hard I have to try aspect. But I will say that I think that the idea of emotional tones does still pervade all of my adventures. So again, you're going to have emotions from Dreams of Princess Papa that are going to make you, you're going to feel something if you play that. You're going to feel something if you play Weekend at Straws, which is a happiness. I have some other adventures that are very dark, and you're going to feel, this grim, overwhelming kind of horror vibe coming through. And, I have one, The Blood Hunter, that has a lot of music in it as well. Tied to like The Witcher, you're going to feel kind of heroic. So these are, I think like emotions are real and they're real levers that as a designer, I purposefully am pulling. I'm purposefully designing around music. I'm having musical cues. I'm having emotional cues that pop out. A lot of my adventures, like I'll use things that kind of make you stop and think, like the Blood Hunter one. The first scene opens up. You're a blood hunter, right? You're like a witcher. You're going into a house to find this werewolf that tore apart these children, and you find an old lady who's there, and like this poor old lady, she was just born a werewolf, and she's been locking herself up every night. But one night she forgot to lock herself up. She turned to a werewolf, and she did this horrible thing. So like you're gonna feel the emotion. Like, what do I do? Do I bring justice upon her? Do I let her go into the wild? Do I take her back? Like, and that's the kind of thing I want players to feel is alive and like this moral, I want them to tap into their morality, either of themselves as a player or the character they're playing, and feel something outside of just I kill another orc or I kill another goblin, and I think that that's what makes those adventures that I like to design memorable, because you feel something. Whatever you do, you walk away from the table, and that feeling, you're going to remember it. And so that's kind of what I'll say about the emotion that I continue to incorporate as I make things.
Yeah, there's not like a right or wrong. It's a gray, and it's like, whatever you do, that's on you at that point. It's not like, you win the game. It's like you made a choice, and that's the baseline.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's no right or wrong in that situation. It's just like you make a choice. And, I think there's making a choice in itself. When you don't make it so black or white, you make it, a lot of choices in life we're going to face are gray. And I think, you don't want to overwhelm players. Like, I don't go overboard, and I don't do that all the time, because you have to learn to take the pedal off, and it's still a game. You want them to have fun. But if you inject it here and there strategically, you can be successful in, building up those emotions. And then you have to have like releases. So like in that same adventure, after you have that scene, you meet a guy named Olos Big Bottom. He's a little halfling with a big butt. He's a bard. It's funny, haha. Like you got to release the pressure from the seriousness. You know what I mean? So
A moment of levity.
That,
yeah.
Yeah. If you can do that, you can do it well.
It makes me think of a decision my players made in Curse of Strahd. There it is again, Alex. And after they made this decision, it resulted in Lady Wachter's hanging, and they looked at each other afterwards, after I'd kind of described the consequence of their actions, and they look at each other and go, "Did we just do the right thing?" And I was like, "Yes!" Oh, that felt so good.
That's awesome. Yeah, they got Lady Watcher hung in Wiki.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It was like, the module's written to kind of play off the Borgia Master versus Lady Wachter. And they said it with Borgia Master. I don't know if they thought it would result in her death or not. And it pretty much immediately did. And they all looked at each other and was like, "Oh, we just did that." Oh, it was great.
Have we had any kind of morally gray things in our campaign? Like,
yeah.
This, oh shoot,
Especially
I don't even realize it.
The more like high powered we get to, it's like, yeah, you could wipe out all of the guards in this town if you really want to, but is that the right thing to do? Like we start running into stuff like that too.
Right, sure. This is why I need you to take my notes.
All posted in my player's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Which I absolutely love. Okay. Alex, do you have any questions?
No, I think this is a good I like Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I mean, I think that's. Oh, okay. This is gonna sound like a dumb question. You have like this is a silver seller and a bronze seller. I didn't know what any of that meant, and I haven't looked it up yet. But what is your top award on DMsGuild or top seller thing?
Yeah, Anthony's kind of the big deal, people. Listen up.
I wouldn't say that, but thank you. I would say so. Mithril right now is my top one. So that is, I have 2 products that have achieved that. That's Elminster's Candlekeep Companion and Baldur's Gate Fall of Elturel, and that means that those 2 have sold over 2,500 copies. I've been very fortunate. Those are again products I worked with Justice on. So, and then I have my other ones, I've been fortunate to get platinums and things like that as well with a lot of other products out there. So again, I think the key to that is collaboration. The ones I collaborate with on very well with others, they do well, and the results are clear.
Collaboration is key. All right, Dave, you have any other questions?
No questions. I want to highlight, I love the idea of marinating on creative ideas, especially while listening to music. I thought that notion was really cool. I thought the notion of you can't separate Star Wars from music, kind of combining with that last strand of thought, was that kind of like, hit me as just like a truth bomb. But no questions, no.
Anything else you'd like to add, Anthony?
No, hey, again, thanks for having me on. For anybody listening, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter. That's where I kind of live. At Thrawn589 is my handle. And I also have a website, anthonydreams.com. If you go there, you can find all of my creative products and everything about me on that website. So thanks again for having me, and I look forward to seeing what you all do, and I'll check out that Justice Armin one you have there. I heard that guy's kind of shady, so watch out.
All right. Dave, do you have anything to plug?
You can find my, wait for it, 4 entries on the DMsGuild.
Woo.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They're like crafting guides. So if you got those players that are like, hey, I got these blacksmith tools, what do I do with them? You can look up my stuff. I think if you just type in my name, Dave Albin, you'll find them.
All right. Alex?
Thank you so much for listening for another episode of our podcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are absolutely wanting to talk to everybody and anybody. You can also join us on our Discord channel, or if you are so inclined, please help us out on Patreon. We love all of our subscribers so far. There are things going out. Stickers are getting out there in the world. They're super cute. If you want to be a part of our sticker gang, please help us and support us on Patreon. It helps us grow, and we will love to do this for years to come. But we do need your help, because as much as it's fun to do it for free, it's much better to be supported. Also, rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. That really helps get the word out. Share with your friends, your family, your dead relatives. Only rate us 5 stars on Apple. If you don't, your third cat will never be found again.
Thank you so much for listening. My name's Adrian.
And I'm Alex.
Go have some fun.